Hello, America, and to our friends around the world, greetings and welcome back. This portion of What Everybody is Saying by Joe Navarro deals with the knee clasp, and it's an element which hasn't been covered yet about the behavior table of elements for the ellipsis model that was created by Hughes. I decided to incorporate this map right before we start the chapter, or this subsection of the chapter. Right off the bat, I want you to look at the two different colored highlights. One is in blue and the other is in green. The blue highlights Middle East, and you can see that circled under the cultural prevalence is universal, specifically the Middle East, in regards to thigh clasp. And it's also predominantly a feminine display. This is different, and I wanted to emphasize it because not only does this one do an object interaction, as we've discussed in a previous video, but this is the first time, if I'm not mistaken, that a Middle Eastern region has been singled out for having a body language element. Even though the thigh clasp isn't the focus, it is connected to the knee clasp as a confirming gesture. And I wanted to highlight that for you. The other one is, as I've got it highlighted in green, is capillary pressure. It's abbreviated CAP-HIL, and it's in the microphysiology portion, the 4 o'clock, or excuse me, the 8 o'clock position on the element card. It's highlighted in green. And then the object interaction is chair arms. It is one of the two amplifying gestures. The other one being posture tilt. We've already covered foot withdrawal. That was just a few days ago. And if you look at the title, I've even incorporated FW, foot withdrawal, into the title so it's easier to be searched. All right, let's take a look at knee clasp. It is universal across cultures, across sexes. It has no conflicting behavior. The element card focuses on hands, which is accurate because it's the hands that are doing the gesture. But it can't be done without having, in this element card, the knees. So it's the hands interacting with the lower half of the body, in this case the knees, or thighs. All right, keep that in mind. So it has a DRS rating of 2.5, and if you add in foot withdrawal and thigh clasp, you're now looking at a potential, 4 is is the breaking point for deception ratings. All right, so just keep this in mind as we continue with chapter 3. The knee clasp. There are other examples of intention movements of the legs that are associated with an individual who wants to leave his current location. Take note, if a person who is sitting down places both hands on his knees in a knee clasp. This is a very clear sign that in his mind he is ready to conclude the meeting and take leave. Usually, this hands-on knees gesture is followed by a forward lean of the torso and/or a shift of the lower body to the edge of the chair, both intention movements. Now, before we continue on, I want you to notice Mr. Navarro's foot positioning. He has the foot withdraw. It's pulled back. In fact, I would I would associate this with a sprinter's starting position at a track meet. They're not, at a 3-point stance or a 4-point stance that most sprinters have, but that stance that he's sitting in, that is what it reminds me of, is a runner's stance waiting for the starting gun. When you note these cues, particularly when they come from your superior, it's time to end your interaction. Be astute and don't linger. Gravity-defying behaviors of the feet. When we are happy and excited, we walk as if we're floating on air. We see this with lovers enthralled to be around each other, as well as with children who are eager to enter a theme park. Gravity seems to hold no boundaries for those who are excited. These behaviors are quite obvious, and yet every day, all around us, gravity-defying behaviors seemingly elude our observation.
Jay?
Frank.
Of course, this is from the files of Police Squad, The Naked Gun, the first one, and apparently there is a fourth being readied for release in the next few months with Liam Neeson. But this is Leslie Nielsen and Priscilla Presley. I want you to know that I went and looked on at least 2 or 3 different AI sources to find the timestamp. And they kept telling me, whether it was YouTube or Brave or Grok, that were saying, yeah, it's too vague, not enough information. I suffered for you, my friends, watching all 85 minutes of this movie to find this scene to incorporate. When we are excited about something or feel very positive about our circumstances, we tend to defy gravity by doing such things as rocking up and down on the balls of our feet, or walking with a bit of a bounce in our step. This is the limbic brain once again manifesting itself in our nonverbal behaviors. Recently, I was watching a stranger talk on his cell phone. As he listened, his left foot, which had been resting flat on the ground, changed position. The heel of the foot remained on the ground, but the rest of his shoe moved up so that his toes were pointing skyward. To the average person, that behavior would have gone unnoticed or been disregarded as insignificant. But to the trained observer, that gravity-defying foot behavior can be readily decoded to mean that the man on the phone had just heard something positive. Sure enough, as I walked by, I could hear him say, "Really? That's terrific!" His feet had already silently said the same thing.
All right. Then take this with you.
And it's a bit exaggerated, but there's your toe rising with Priscilla Presley and Leslie Nielsen from Naked Gun, 33 1/3, The Last Insult. Even when standing still, a person telling a story may inch up to a taller stance, elevating himself to emphasize his points, and he may do so repeatedly. The individual does this subconsciously. Therefore, these elevating behaviors are very honest cues, since they tend to be true expressions of the emotion attached to the story. They appear in real time along with the storyline and relate his feeling along with his words. Just as we move our feet to the beat and tempo of a song we like, so too will we move our feet and legs in congruence with something positive we say. Interestingly, gravity-defying behaviors of the feet and legs are rarely seen in people suffering from clinical depression. The body reflects precisely the emotional state of the individual. So when people are excited, we tend to see many more gravity-defying behaviors. Can gravity-defying behaviors be faked? I suppose they can be, particularly by really good actors and perennial liars. But average people simply don't know how to regulate their limbic behaviors. Side note, this is why it's imperative to establish a baseline. When people try to control their limbic reactions or gravity-defying behaviors, it looks contrived. Either they appear too passive or restrained for the situation, or not animated enough. A faked upward arm greeting just doesn't cut it. It looks fake because the arms are not up for very long, and usually the elbows are bent. The gesture has all the hallmarks of being contrived. True gravity-defying behaviors are usually a very good barometer of a person's positive emotional state, and they look genuine. One type of gravity-defying behavior that can be very informative to the astute observer is known as the starter's position. This is an action in which a person moves his or her feet, from a resting position, flat on the ground, to a ready or starter's position. On your mark, get set. And I referred to this earlier in the seated position with the foot withdrawal. This is similar. This is the standing upright version of that. So to a ready or starter's position with the heel elevated and weight on the balls of the feet. This is an intention cue that tells us the person is getting ready to do something physical requiring foot movement. Anyone who's played sports knows whether it's wrestling, boxing, baseball, basketball, any of these things. When you're watching your opponent, they will do what's called telegraph. And you can see how the foot stance changes and the weight distribution changes from being full-footed, meaning all your weights being equally balanced upon your foot, even, as in like a firm foundation, to the rocked back on your heels, making you unsteady, to the ready to go, whether it's to fight or flight, balls of your feet. All right, so this is an intention cue that tells us the person is getting ready to do something physical requiring foot movement. Oh, and the other part is weight distribution, side to side, left to right. That's another, version of this. But what you're looking for is that transition from side to side to becoming fixed and forward to the balls of the feet. It could mean the individual intends to engage you further, is really interested, or wants to leave. And the leaving aspect we've covered already. The limbic system, if this person is wanting to escape or feels obligated to serve a more valuable or a higher regarded action, purpose, cause, calling, they're going to have at least one foot slightly pointed away towards the exit, if not both feet. All right, back to the rest of this page. Requiring foot movement, it could mean the individual intends to engage you further, is really interested, or wants to leave. As with all non-verbal intention cues, once you learn a person is about to do something, you need to rely on the context and what you know about the individual to make your best assessment of what that something is going to be. All right, next topic, leg splay. The most unmistakable and easily spotted foot and leg behaviors are territorial displays. Most mammals, human or not, can become territorial when they are stressed or upset, when they are being threatened, or conversely, when they are threatening others. In each case, they will exhibit behaviors indicating they are trying to reestablish control of their situation and their territory. Law enforcement and military personnel use these behaviors because they are accustomed to being in charge. Sometimes they will try to outdo each other, at which point it becomes farcical as each person tries to splay out wider than his colleagues in a subconscious attempt to claim more territory. When people find themselves in confrontational situations, their feet and legs will splay out, not only for greater balance but also to claim greater territory. This sends out a very strong message to the careful observer that at a minimum there are issues afoot or that there is potential for real trouble. When two people face off in disagreement, you will never see their legs crossed so that they are off balance. The limbic brain simply will not allow this to take place. If you observe a person's feet going from being together to being spread apart, you can be fairly confident that the individual is becoming increasingly unhappy. And remember, this is done, the widening of the stance and the planting of your feet with the weight evenly distributed is done to anchor your foundation. Confident that the individual is becoming increasingly unhappy. This dominant stance communicates very clearly, something is wrong and I am ready to deal with it. Territorial leg splays signal the potential for tempers to flare. Thus, whether you find yourself observing or using this type of nonverbal behavior, you should be on the alert for possible trouble. Because people often assume a more splayed posture when an argument escalates. I tell executives as well as law enforcement officers that one way to diffuse a confrontation is to avoid using such territorial displays. If we catch ourselves in a leg splay posture during a heated exchange and immediately bring our legs together, it often lessens the confrontation level and reduces the tension. A few years ago, while I was conducting a seminar, a woman in the audience spoke about how her ex-husband used to intimidate her during an argument by standing in the doorway of their house, legs splayed, blocking her exit. This is not a behavior to be taken lightly. It resonates visually as well as viscerally and can be used to control, intimidate, and threaten. In fact, predators, for example, psychopaths, antisocials, often use this leg splay behavior in conjunction with eye gaze behavior to control others. As one prison inmate once told me, in here, it's all about posture, how we stand, how we look. We can't look weak, not for one moment. I suspect anywhere we might encounter predators, we should be cognizant of our posture and stance. There are, of course, times when a leg splay can be used to your advantage, specifically when you want to establish authority and control over others for a positive reason. I have had to coach female law enforcement officers to use the leg splay to establish a more aggressive stance when responding to unruly crowds in the line of duty. Standing with their feet together, which is perceived as submissive, sends the wrong kind of signal to a would-be antagonist. By moving their feet apart, the female officers can take a more dominant, I am in charge stance, which will be perceived as more authoritarian and thus help them be more effective in controlling unruly individuals. You may want to emphasize to a teenage son how you feel about smoking, not by raising your voice, but rather by using a territorial display. All right, I'm going to leave it there because we're coming up on 20 minutes. One thing that I want to draw attention to is that this was written before the advent of what's her name, Ella Sukowitz, the mattress girl that tried to walked around with a mattress on her back, saying, "Look at me, look at me, look at me." You know, you should feel bad for me because I picked bad men who you know didn't call me for a second date. And then the nonsense of the Me Too movement that you started getting women becoming emboldened to challenge men who would oftentimes just be minding their own business because for a man, the natural inclination is to sit with their knees apart. And this deals with physiology. We like the boys to breathe. That's really what it comes down to. Don't expect you to understand, but perhaps you can because of what's going on upstairs. But if you cannot empathize, if you cannot relate, just think of it this way. We like free flow air. We can't get it because of the laws on the books. So the best we can do is just kind of keep the knees apart, and it has nothing to do with territorial claims other than saying, hey, this works for airflow, and yes, I don't want you near me. So do recognize it's not a challenge or a threat, it's just a physiological expression of comfort.